Welcome to Faith Walk Life Talk podcast. We embark on a journey through the untold stories of the Bible's unsung heroines. Join us as we deep dive into the lives of remarkable women whose narratives are often overlooked but carry profound wisdom and inspiration. From their triumphs to their trials, we'll uncover the timeless lessons embedded in their journeys, lessons that resonate powerfully with women today. Get ready for engaging, thought-provoking, and sometimes delightfully humorous conversations that shed new light on the remarkable women of the Bible. Welcome to a podcast that promises to enlighten, uplift, and entertain. Welcome to Faith Walk Life Talk podcast. I'm your host, Elder Empress. Hey guys. Welcome to Faith Walk Life Talk podcast. It's your girl, Elder Empress, and I'm yet faith walking in my stilettos. I am excited for the show we have for you today. We're going to be discussing Hagar, the God that sees me. In Genesis, the 16th chapter, we read about Hagar, who's the maidservant of Sarai. We see that the circumstances are surrounded where Hagar is been given to Abraham to give birth to a child on behalf of Sarah. There was a promise that was made in the 12th chapter of Genesis that Sarah and Abraham would give birth to a son that has not yet manifested. And so we see a interruption by Sarah to give Hagar over to be the surrogate mother for that child. This puts everyone in an awkward position. Hagar is in a situation where there's contention between her and Sarah that leads to her to flee. And she runs out in the wilderness where she has an encounter with an angel. And the angel begins to have a discourse with her and lets her know that God sees her. And this is where we begin to see that there is a promise over Ishmael's life. This is the son of Abraham and Hagar. So today we're going to discuss what it looks like when you realizes the God that sees you. And we are so excited today to have our very special guest, Ro McKenzie. She's an author, and she's also a podcast host of Dear God Love Me. Let's welcome Ro McKenzie, the author and podcast host of Dear God Love Me. Hey, welcome to Faith Walk Life Talk. I'm your host, Elder Empress, and I'm super excited to have my special guest, Mrs. Ro McKenzie. She's a believer in and lover of Christ. She's a wife. She's a mother of a son. She loves laughter. And she's a singer, a preacher, and that indeed she is. She's the author of Volume 1, Dear God Love Me, a practical approach to navigating through life's challenges, and also Volume 2, a second book, Dear God Love Me, Sentiments of My Heart, Depth of My Mind. She's a creative, a podcast host of Dear God Love Me, and she is a radio show host. Welcome, Ro, to Faith Walk Life Talk podcast.
Thank you so much.
We are so super excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here with you.
Yes, thank you so much. We're talking about Hagar.
Yes.
The God who sees me. And before we get into our discussion, would you please share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, because you have such a unique gifts, that I've just been discovering in the last few minutes, and I want my listeners to really know who you are.
Sure.
Yes.
So hearing you read everything down, it's kind of like, whoa, okay.
Yes.
Because as you know, I'm sure when you're kind of multifaceted, you don't really think about it.
Right.
It's just like, I'm just being me.
Yeah.
But everything you listed is what and who I am. I really do love Jesus.
Yes.
I love God's people.
Yes.
I love to laugh.
I do too.
I love to laugh. It's medicine.
Yes.
It really is. And I'm just a regular girl. I really am. Just a regular girl who God happened to lend all these gifts to. So I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to use them as best as I can and the way that he would want me to.
Yes.
And to show people God's love.
I love that for you. I'd like for you to really kind of talk to us about Dear God, Love Me, the books,
Yes.
Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Yeah. Okay. So, Dear God, Love Me, Depths of My Heart, Sentiments of My Mind. The way the books were given to me was to write them in the form of letters.
Oh, okay.
I've always been a huge fan of handwritten letters. I love them. They're intentional. They're therapeutic to write. They just mean a lot. I don't know anyone who has received a handwritten letter from
Yes.
someone and it didn't mean anything to them.
Absolutely.
And so I've always loved letters, and I've always written letters. And so when God gave me the concept, just to write these letters, because they're really my conversation with him.
Wow, okay.
And my prayers to him. And so I wrote the letters, and the way it ended up working out was I circled back to whatever that topic was that I was talking to God about. I paired it with a reflection, because sometimes when you're going through that thing or when you're facing that challenge and you're navigating through it, your mindset shifts from that moment to the moment when you're able to grasp what the lesson was.
Absolutely.
And so I just paired each letter with a reflection that included definitions and a closer look at the challenge that I was facing at that time.
Oh, I love that. So I was very piqued. My interest was piqued about the navigating through life's challenges. So was the book birthed out of you going through the life challenge or on the other side of life's challenges?
The conception and the birth of the books was from the place of the challenges.
Okay.
And so in hindsight, when I'm able to say, okay, I was facing this particular issue and I was able to navigate it through it, and this is what I learned from it, my next thought was, how can I help other people to navigate through some of the same things that I am? And so that's where the reflection came in.
Okay.
And so the whole concept, yes, birthed through different challenges that I
Okay.
was facing, and it kind of just circled back. Like, because I'm a firm believer that anything we go through, anything we experience, it's not just for us.
Absolutely.
Someone else's lifeline is what my experience has been.
Oh, I
And so
know
I
that.
wanted to be able to put it all together and say, here, use this as a resource. If you're going through some of the challenges I'm going through, prayerfully you can find some encouragement within the pages of these books.
Well, I am excited to read that book. I'm just coming out of some super life challenges.
Yes.
Many know my story, and God's been very gracious to bring me through the process. But I would love to see what tools or what advice that you can
Yes.
offer, anybody that has gone through life challenges. I really like to, I'm so super excited to read that book. Get that book, Dear God, Love Me, Navigating Through Life's Challenges. So here we are, we're sitting here, we're going to talk about Hagar. Hagar is somebody that has become endearing to me. When I see Hagar, I see a lot of young women, young single women in predicaments where they have no voice. They have they have very minimal choices in their predicament. And my heart kind of went out to Hagar. And so God began to illuminate her even more. And I just started reading her story, praying, meditating on this particular woman. And as you know, we were going to discuss another character, but God kept showing me you in relation to talking about Hagar.
Okay.
And what I loved about Hagar is when she comes to that place where she realizes that she's been seen. And so I want you to really kind of lay out or unpeel Hagar's character and just kind of like the backdrop of her story.
Okay, sure. So from my perspective, right, Hagar, I also typically I'm like for the underdog.
Yes.
And so I believe that's probably why you decided to contact me for this particular woman. Hagar, as we all know the story and the situation with Abram and Sarai, and the first thing that really stood out for me with Hagar's story is that she didn't have a choice. She had zero say in whether or not she was going to go and be with Sarai's husband so that Sarai could have a child. And I think that is, like you said, parallel to a lot of the young women that we see today. There's all types of movements now that we see with empowering women and making sure that women know what their voice is, but there's still a huge demographic of those young ladies who have not yet discovered how powerful their voices are.
Absolutely.
And so I believe that the fact that she had no choice and she was handled like property and said, because I'm too impatient to wait for the promise that God gave me, you go and do this. You don't have a choice in the matter. And once you do it, now I'm going to ostracize you for it.
Yes.
So I'm doing what I'm told to do, even if I don't want to. And I think it's very interesting that we don't see Hagar's point of view until she gets cast out. We don't see how she felt about that. We don't see that she probably was crying herself to sleep at night. We don't see any of what her perspective was until we see the point where it was looking really, really, really grim for her. Where she was about to give up until the Lord sent someone to speak with her.
I'm glad you laid it out that way. When I was really looking at Hagar, so many things kind of popped out at me. So when the discussion is had between husband and wife that they would take this maidservant to stand as a surrogate, if you will, for this child, and you see no choice in the matter for Hagar, I was really researching in that time. There were often times with the maidservant, and we see that with Bilhah and Rachel.
Okay.
Where the maidservant is given over to give birth to the wife's child. And what they would do is they would take the maidservant and sit her on the lap of the wife, and she would have to give birth. Well, she would have to be inseminated first from that position, and then she would sit on the wife's lap to give birth to the baby, and then the baby is then given over. So as she's going through the 9 months, she's bonding with a baby that she's carrying in her body, that she knows as it's growing and as she's bonding with, she's going to have to give over to someone else. And so as I was looking at the story, when the Bible says that when she realizes that she's pregnant, she kind of has like anger. She's demonstrating an anger towards Sarai, which then causes Sarai to taunt her. And so it's like, well, was she angry about that you put me in this position, and then now you're taking my child, that's my child, you're gonna take my child, and she's getting angry at the thought of it? Or is she getting haughty and saying, I have the seed, and I'm giving birth to your husband's child, and so now my value has now increased over yours.
Right. Yesterday's price is not today's price.
And so this contention starts to breed in the dynamic of the family, and so now it has come to if you will, a crescendo, right? So now take us to the wilderness experience.
Right.
Okay.
I love what you said about that. If I can.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Because it's from us looking at Sarai, right? Like, you can choose your actions, but you can't choose your consequences.
I love that.
And so you're, like you said, you've chosen her to be your surrogate against her will. It was probably a nice, even mix of both, where Hagar's like, you couldn't do this and I could.
Yes.
So now I'm going to taunt this in your face, as well as I'm angry with you because I know you're going to take this child away from me as soon as he's born.
Right.
And so that contention, like you said, building up to that crescendo, and Sarai not even being able to handle the ramifications of her own decisions,
right,
and saying, now get out of my face.
Yes.
So, and once again, Hagar's doing what she's told and finds herself in the wilderness, despondent, hopeless, feeling like, not only did you make me lay with him, now I have this child, And I don't even know where I might not even be on your lap to give birth to this baby because you've cast me out. So now you've compounded my already terrible situation, and now I'm all alone. So I have to still deal with the fact that I'm carrying this seed. And as a mother who has carried a seed, every single thing that you do, you're thinking about your baby.
Absolutely.
And so that's even outside circumstances that you can't control. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Now what's going on? Because I have this seed. I have to protect this seed, even though I know it's going to be taken away from me. This is still my baby. And so being cast in the wilderness all alone, it was probably, the way I imagine it, because I'm a little extra.
Be extra, because I love extra.
Oh, good.
I'm here for it.
So the way I imagine it is like this huge blow up, right? Because Sarai is sick of, maybe she started showing, maybe she's flaunting around, maybe she's doing all this stuff.
Rubbing her belly in her face.
Right, like, I'm so waddling before you need to, like the whole thing. And I just picture it as being this huge blow up and her getting thrown out, just her and her belly, and then landing in this place. And it's like, what am I going to do now?
Well, to circle back, she really wasn't thrown out. She kind of, the circumstances was so unbearable that she leaves.
Okay.
And Sarai just becomes like vicious. She's blaming Abraham.
Nasty.
She's traumatizing and she's torturing Hagar. I could only imagine. I've never been in a situation like that, but you've ever been maybe even on a job where you've had like a tyrant boss. You need that job, right? You have bills, you have responsibilities, you need that job. And this authoritarian is just,
antagonizing.
Yes, every second. And so I put myself in the place of Hagar, that what would make you leave without having a destination to go to? It had to be that bad, right? So Sarai is just taking no accountability because this was her setup, right? So, my heart again goes out to Hagar. She portrays a marginalized and powerless person in the Bible. And what I wanted to ask you is, can you share with us, or are you willing to share with us an instance where you felt marginalized or treated unfairly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know why I thought she was thrown out. But thank you for bringing that back.
I did think that too, and I really went back and I said, oh no.
That was her decision to leave.
No, she left.
Okay.
Yeah, she left. Yep.
So, similar to what you brought up, right? I think all of us have had that one job where it's like, is this being recorded?
Right,
like,
right.
Where's Ashton Cooker? You have to be punking me right now. This can't be serious. And so in that workplace, like you said, I did need that job. But it had gotten to a place where going there every day.
Say it.
It felt like torture.
Yes.
And no matter what I did, no matter how well I performed, nothing was good enough.
Been there.
And I'm like, I know I'm doing my absolute best. And to put your best foot forward and to really show up and give something your all.
Yes.
And for someone to look at you and say, that's not good enough.
Yes.
That is dehumanizing.
Yes.
And so it had gotten to a point at this job where I said, okay, because even though I felt that way, my mother didn't raise me to be, how can I say, can I just
say
she ain't raise a punk.
Yeah, right. That's what I was waiting to hear.
At the same time as I feel like y'all are beating up on me, at a certain point, I'm going to say, okay, enough.
The fight in you rises
I'm going to fight
up.
back.
Yeah.
So, because I know that I'm doing my best, and I know that I'm doing a good job, and I know that I'm doing this the right way. And so I had, instead of them calling a meeting, now I'm calling a meeting. No, I want to talk to the director. Let me show you my stats. Let me show you that I'm telling you this one particular person is the reason why you're not seeing what you're seeing over here. And you see clear, I'll never forget. I asked to have a meeting with executive management about a particular issue, and they granted me the meeting, and I said,
That
okay.
was brave.
Beautiful. I was scared, but I did it afraid anyway. And so I had the meeting. I said, if you look at these dates, you look at who is on staff, you look at my it clearly shows that this has been intentional.
Wow.
And you saw the light bulb where he was literally like, oh. And I'm like, so you are all have been beating down on me about something that I'm telling you, this is the reason why.
Wow.
And so now you see.
Okay.
And so in that moment, which is what I'm glad that you kind of talked about being marginalized, because I look at it in two different ways.
Okay.
I look at marginalization as the overt, where what they were doing to me, this is overt, it's intentional. Like, you want to make me feel like my voice doesn't matter, that I'm being looked over, I'm being cast aside as useless. But then I believe that if we allow ourselves to get stuck there, we kind of cozy up with being marginalized.
Be comfortable with it.
We get comfortable with it.
Wow.
Because of our insecurities, because of low self-esteem, because we don't see ourselves the way God sees us.
Wow.
And so
okay.
we can kind of put that on as a cloak and say, well, no, they're just marginalizing me. But it's not. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to. You were saying something so powerful, but I did want to interject, because you did speak about getting enough courage to call a meeting. But what did it look like to get up to that courage? Because I know when I was in that situation, I had to talk myself into that, right? Will they hear me? Will they grant me the meeting? Will this cause a backlash? You know, you go through the whole head case of what are the consequences going to be if I call the meeting? For you, they heard you, right? But for some, will they hear me? Will they be on my side? Do I have an advocate in this situation? You know, so what did that look like to even work yourself up to the process of having the courage to advocate for yourself?
Determination. It was a mix of desperation and determination, because the way I'm being treated is not sustainable. And so if I don't do something, it's going to get bad. Because then I'm going to start leaning on parts of my personality that can be used for more harm than good. And I refuse.
I love that.
I refuse to act in a way that's going to damage someone else, even though you coming for me. I'm not. That doesn't mean that I need to reciprocate that in such a harmful way. I can advocate for myself,
right,
and you be uncomfortable, and you'll be all right, just like I was all right.
Right.
But if it gets to the point where now I'm being nasty.
Yeah, and coming out of character.
Yeah, I can't afford to do that. Right. I just can't.
The cost is too high, especially when you're a believer and you have a confession.
Right.
The cost is too high to come out of character, because then the narrative becomes, well, you said you were this, or you told me you were that, and this is how your light is forever being illuminated on you and your behavior and how you show up. So I love that you were able to, even under duress and under challenge, control your narrative, control how you show up. But I like that you said that the very thing that moved you to action was desperation.
Yeah.
Because I see that absolutely in this story with Hagar. She was desperate for a way out. As a maidservant, before this even became the situation, I can only imagine what life was. What I would imagine with Hagar is that she was a stellar maidservant, that when Sarai looked upon, and I'm sure there were other maidservants, that she was the one that was selected. Was it that she was the most obedient and subservient? Was it that she was the most attractive? And all of these things were considered when giving birth to her son or her child. So for all of the good that she brought to the table, it resulted in misery for her, right? So the desperation part was the very thing that caused her to move out. So what I want to kind of talk about and move along is, so now she's desperate for a way of escape.
Yeah.
Some peace, maybe to escape with her baby. But then she has an encounter.
Yeah.
And this is where the story really turns in her favor, which I really, really love and appreciate. The encounter with the angel.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on when the angel begins to ask her, Hagar, where are you going? Where have you come from?
I think it had to have been difficult for her to have that conversation, because I think in those moments of desperation when you're just trying to get out, it's like I used everything that I had in me to make this move. I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you're making me face it. You're making me discuss the decision that I made.
Yeah.
And I also, what I found interesting about it, and I hope I'm not messing up the facts of it in my mind, but when the angel asked her where she was coming from and where she was going, and they engaged in that dialogue, ultimately he told her to go back.
Yes. Right.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
After I made all this fuss and left, you're making me go back and submit myself to this nasty lady.
Yeah, right.
I really want to fight her.
Yes.
You're telling me to
go back.
go submit myself to her.
What does that look like when God tells you to go back to a situation that you thought you were escaping, and the only thing you can think of is you're telling me to go back to misery, despair? What does that look like? Like, what do you think her mindset was when he's saying, go back? After you've spilt your guts out and you've explained who you were, why you're at this place in the desert, and he says, okay, now go back to her.
Oh, it had to be deflating. I would think it was deflating, but I also feel like because she modeled the behavior of being obedient and doing what she was told, there had to be that, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to prepare for the worst. And it ended up working out for her. So I think because it kind of goes back to her being a model maidservant, right? If she was one of the hardest workers, if she was the most obedient, even in moments of difficulty, even when we don't want to, even when it looks like you're really making me go back to this cycle of abuse, it's better to obey than to sacrifice.
Yes.
So even though it looks difficult, we have to kind of take that leap and say, I'm going to be obedient this one last time and see what happens.
That's interesting that you say that. I believe that something transformative happened in that brief dialogue where she understood who was speaking to her. And there was just like a blind trust in that, even though you're telling me to do something that goes against everything that I know to be true, I've experienced it firsthand, there's something about you telling me to go back that I'm going to trust it and trust that it's not going to be the same when I go back. Or could have been, I'm going back with a level of grace that whatever it is, I can deal with it.
Yeah. I would lean towards that. Like, if you're telling me to go back and I told you what the situation is and I perceive now that I know who's speaking to me, surely you're going to give me what I need to go through it.
Yeah.
Because there has to be that resolve. And I think we never get rid of that fight, right? Even though we fully surrender, there's still those thoughts in the back of your mind where it's like, I'm fully surrendered. I'm going to do this. I've resolved to do it. But it's a little scary.
Yes, choosing to trust God can be scary. But we see instances where people didn't have a lot of thought, a lot of time to think about it.
Oh, yeah.
The choice was either you're going to obey or you're not. Even when Jesus had the encounter with Peter on the boat, and he says, launch your net out. He says, we've been toiling all night. But at your word, right? He didn't think about it too long. I'm going to do this because you're telling me to do it. So with Hagar, she didn't have a lot of time to respond in obedience. What she's being asked to do goes against everything in her body, all of the trauma that she's just escaped from, to go back. I believe there's something transformative happened where she just understood that she was having an encounter with the Lord. And so I know I just spoke about having the grace to go back and face. And so, and that's why I was really piqued about your book, about navigating life's challenges. And so can you kind of give us a little something out of the book that would align to the story, this type of challenge?
With Hagar?
Or just being graced to do something that looks uncomfortable. Everything in your body has experienced something totally different than what they're telling you to do. How can you navigate a challenge that that you're being asked to do, but based on your prior experience, it didn't work out well?
Right. So the first letter in the first book is entitled Process.
Okay.
And so because of the way my mind works, similar to what we were talking about offline, right, is that structure is what I thrive in. Order.
Yeah.
I thrive in order.
Same.
So there are some processes that I've had to go through where, because I know I'm meticulous, and if I'm going to do something, I have to do it. I have to be fully engaged. I have to give it my all. When I apply that to a difficult process, whether it's losing a job, needing to end a friendship, walking away from a toxic environment that I've become comfortable in, no matter what that process is, I don't want to do it.
Wow.
Nothing in me wants to do this and go through this process, but because I know that God's plan for me is not going to bring me harm.
Yes.
It's to prosper me. It's so that I'm going to glean something that I can help someone else with. I have to make that resolve. I have to say, not my will. So this is going to be difficult, and I don't want to, but I'm going to do it.
I'm going to do it. Yeah, I think when we make choices, maybe a friend will say, well, why don't you do it this way? That's a very risky decision. But when we know that God has given us a directive, it may not feel good in our bodies, but, we know that, the flesh is not what we respond to.
Right.
So we have to, be governed by the Spirit. So we trust. And that's why it's so important to know the word that lets us know that obedience is better than sacrifice. So we know that it's going to end up well. We may not understand the process, his process. We may not even fully understand how it's going to work out for our good, but we just know that it will.
It will.
So let's talk about when she has the revelation, because that's, for me, when things take a turn. So the angel's saying, go back. She's spilled out her whole story. She's had a platform and an ear to just empty out, pour out, right? She says, not only does the angel tell her to go back, but the angel begins to say that God hears her, God sees her, God saw all of it. He saw the pain, he saw the misery, he saw when she was being traumatized and tormented. And so that revelation, when she realizes, I wasn't, just in this alone. Somebody higher than me saw me at my lowest and he sees me now.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is it like? Because I remember the moment when I realized God saw me.
Yeah.
Like the power in that. Because everything in me aligned to who what his purpose for my life was, when you know God sees you.
Right.
Right? So that means nothing was ever missed. When I was done wrong, it was all purposely put in place to work out for my good. So can you share with us what it was like when you realized God saw you?
It was like he changed the lens for me. The lens that I was looking at it through was there were moments where I feel like maybe I was dwelling in this victimhood and not realizing that it was for a greater purpose. And so by him changing that lens for me, it allowed me to change my perspective. And so I'm able to look for the good even though I was going through those bad things. And I was able to, we're talking about my personal situation?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. I don't want to answer the wrong thing.
No.
And so I was able to do what I needed to do in that space with knowing that God, so he made a way for me to get that meeting.
Yes.
I don't know who I thought I was. Calling it. I'm like, no, I want to meet with him.
Yes.
Not
I
you,
want the
not
big boss.
this one.
Yes.
And it was shocking that they did it, but I'm like, okay, so if he allowed me to have this meeting and say what I needed to say, and for me to see that they understood, he knew exactly what I needed in order to sustain me through until I was able to leave.
Okay.
Because if I didn't have that meeting, I probably would have left prematurely, got myself in more financial trouble, but I was able to sustain just long enough to execute a strategy that God gave me to then get advancement.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's just sometimes a matter of changing that lens and changing our perspective.
So what would you say to a young woman who may be a young single mother, who may be on social services, you know, they're trying to see a better life for themselves, but all they're being viewed as a stereotypical young mother, lack of resources. What do you say to someone to encourage them in that God sees you? Like, how can you get someone who would be listening to this podcast to be encouraged that God really does see you?
That's it. He really does see you. And I think sometimes when we respond to people's attempts to marginalize us, and not only marginalize us, but to weaponize that.
Okay.
And to say, because you have a lack of resources, now I'm going to put this label on you as well. And so not only are you here, but you're going to stay here. You're lower than this person. You're never going to get. So I think sometimes when we respond to that, we start to believe that we're less. But just because you have have limited resources, most of the times in those situations, that's not our choice. That's not that young. Some of her decisions landed her in the place that she's in.
Right.
But my lack of resources is not always because of me. And so to weaponize that and use it against me to make me feel a certain way, I have to dissociate from that.
Right.
And so I would say to be encouraged in that is to know it's not always what they call you, it's what you respond to.
Say that again.
It's not always what people call you, it's what you respond to. And so just because these are my circumstances, it doesn't mean that I'm less than.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I'm always going to be here. I'm taking advantage of the resources that I do have to get myself back up. And with God and with God's grace, I'm going to be more than what you see me as right now.
I love that. I think about just the whole encounter with the angel in the wilderness, and for me, for anyone that's listening, I'd like to highlight that we often despise our wilderness experiences, but it's in those experiences where the biggest revelations are had, where we be, like you said, we see ourselves from a different lens in those experiences, because what we thought would break us was the very thing that we used to elevate us from where we were. Her story really doesn't end there. We know that the angel talks about the son and gives insight to the son, and that he would be a great, a leader of a great nation. So she gets insight that I'm not just a maidservant who's carrying this child, but the seed that I'm carrying is going to be great.
Yeah.
I've been selected for something great. A greater assignment is on my life.
Yep.
So all of these things become very clear to her in this wilderness. But when we go into the 21st chapter of Genesis, and that's where she does get kicked out, because now...
That's what I was mixing up.
Yes.
Okay.
Because Isaac is now in the picture.
Okay.
And Sarah sees where the Bible says Ishmael is mocking Isaac,
Yes.
right? And so, she's complaining, and so Abraham gives her permission to throw the maid. Now, the very thing you used, for your benefit, now that you have the promise, now you want to discard her.
Right.
And so the Bible, here she is back in the wilderness, right? He gives her a little water, a little food, sends her off with her child and everything like that. The angel tells Abraham, don't worry about him. Don't worry about him. He's, because now Abraham's like, I'm going to stand by my wife, but this is my son,
right?
Who I've bonded with by this point.
Right.
And even though I have Isaac, I still have a love for Ishmael. And the angel tells him, don't worry about Ishmael. So he sends him off, and, Hagar finds herself now with a child. Now she's a single mother, thrown out of the home with a little food and water. She finds herself, and she walks off, and she puts the baby and walks off and says, I can't bear to see, when the water and the food is dried up, I can't bear to see my son die, when she has another encounter with the angel. And he begins to reaffirm who Ishmael will be and who he will become. And she looks in and she realizes that there's a well provided for her, right? And so not only does she have an encounter with the angel where she's seen, but now she's being heard.
Right.
Right? So for those that are out there who have been convinced nobody sees you, you have no power, you're the lowest on the totem pole, all of your circumstances have just become a barrier that you can't see yourself out. There is an angel that will appear to show you that God sees it all. In fact, God sees us even before, while we're being formed in our mother's womb. So there is a purpose in mind for every one of us. And if you are that single mother, it was a single mother that raised the first African-American president of the United States of America. So great things have come forth from single mothers.
Absolutely.
Or castaways. Or those who have had the odds stacked against them.
Right.
Great things have come out of their lives, or of their legacy, their offspring. So, I really would like you, as we are ending this session, which I would love, and I don't want to end because you're just such a light.
Oh.
And I enjoy speaking with you. But I want you to encourage the listeners, that person that will listen, that is almost ready to throw in the towel.
I think the first thing that I would want to say, if you feel like you're at your wit's end, I want to encourage you that it's usually the moments where you feel like, this is it, I'm going to turn away, I'm going to throw my hands up, I'm done, I have had it, is when you're closest to receiving the encouragement that you need to keep going. Just one more step. I had a conversation recently with someone when it talked about put the God's word being a lamp unto our feet.
Yes.
And how they weren't designed to show you the whole way. It was just the next step.
The next step.
All you need is the next step. And so if you feel like that, there have been times where I felt like that too, where it's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm over it.
Yes.
Stick a fork in me.
Yes.
It's a wrap.
Yes.
But all you just remember that it's usually in those moments where you're right at the brink of that moment that you need to be encouraged.
Wow.
To just keep going. It's not the end.
It's not the end. So why don't you tell listeners where they can get both books,
Sure.
Volume 1 and Volume 2?
Okay, so both volumes 1 and 2 of Dear God Love Me are on my website.
Okay.
DearGodLoveMe.com. I believe Volume 1 is also on Amazon, but I'm about to pull it, so just go straight to the website.
Okay.
www.deargodloveme.com. You can access the books, the merch, the podcast, and all of the things.
All of the gifts that you give to us.
I'm just trying to do what I can
and you're
with
doing
what I have.
You're doing a good job at
Thank you.
There you have it, Miss Ro McKenzie. Dear God Love Me. It's been an enjoyable time talking to her and talking about Hagar. Just remember, God sees you and he hears you, and there is great purpose on your life. Don't give up. Even if you're in the wilderness, expect an encounter. Expect some insight from divine intel from heaven that's going to catapult you for your next step. Let the word be a light unto your feet, a lamp unto your feet, and a light unto your pathway, that every step you make, God will illuminate until you get to the place called there. That's all I have for you. Be sure to connect with us at my website, www.faithwalklifetalk.com. You can connect with me. I would like for you all to join me on my YouTube channel. You can also get the episode on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Like, share, subscribe. If you like the content, we also invite you to donate. Help us out. We want to continue to bring to you God's word in an unconventional way. We thank you all for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Just remember, in order to walk this walk, you've got to talk the talk. And most of all, you've got to pray. Until next time, bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining us on Faith Walk Life Talk podcast. Stay connected with us by following our social media pages to catch all our latest episodes. If you enjoyed today's discussion, we greatly appreciate your feedback. Please take a moment to rate and review our podcast, as your input helps us to continually improve and deliver high-quality content. I'm Empress Henderson, your podcast host. Until next time, keep walking in faith and living your best life. But most importantly, you must pray, girl. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye.